I think that there's definitely negotiations that need to be done, and I think that whether you look at our deal, the union's deal, or the league's deal, it's like both of them are not ready. Both are not ready to be voted on because both need to be negotiated either up or down or in a number of ways. I agree with Plum. I think that while we still are fighting for a lot of different things, we have to realize that the rev share is a win. Especially just even coming from the 2020 CBA and the ones before that, like both of those, I wasn't like privy of being on the EC for. I was a player rep before, but it's like now as the league makes money, we make money, and so when she talks about, I don't think a strike is good for anyone because as the league loses money, or if we have a delay, we also lose money, and really just kind of being aware of that as a whole, and that's not just me as a player, that's me thinking as like an overall business person. You know, nobody wants to lose money, so how can we try to prevent that in all ways possible?
You mentioned that you would be happy to see Adam Silver be involved in the CBA talks. Since he mentioned it at the All-Star game, mentioning that the talks were in the 11th hour,
yeah.
What if any contact has Adam or his team had with the negotiations?
Adam has not been at the table in any of the in-person or Zoom meetings. I don't know what else is happening behind the scenes, but from our perspective, we haven't seen it.
We've heard from players that they were told at least 2 years ago to save up for the potential of this year. So I hear you and Kelsey are both saying like you don't want to strike, but is that still something you guys are prepared to do if needed, since players were told to save up for this time?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have like that's Terry basically saying and reminding players of really being smart with your money, because while we are fighting for what we want, we might not get that, and if we don't get that, and then what? So I think that having the idea of saving your money, having the one-team partnerships, that distribution coming in, having the rev share from the previous CBA coming in, like that makes people feel a little bit better. But at the same time, it's like, it's going to be a loss.
A lot of CBA news yesterday, and a lot of them were some quotes coming out of what we just heard Breanna Stewart saying, and I thought she said so many interesting things. So I want to unpack it, right? So she was asked about whether or not she thought they were ready to sign, a deal now. And she made it clear, like, no, there's still work to be done there on both sides, okay? So that was pretty straightforward. She was asked what her thoughts were, or if she was in alignment with what Kelsey Plum had said earlier, where Kelsey Plum said that, she thought it was a win, that to acknowledge that the newest and latest proposal from the league is a win because they're in revenue share now, and that no one wants to strike like players want to play. So I'm paraphrasing, but these are some of the things that Kelsey Plum said. And, Breanna said, yeah, she's, in agreement with that. And I think we should be clear that all the players, all the parties involved have said they don't want a work stoppage. So, I mean, I think everyone feels like that. No one wants that, but it's about what each side wants and how do they get there, and whether a work stoppage will be needed to get to what each party desires. And so, but for some reason, the takeaway from yesterday by many was that, the players are not willing to strike anymore. That was sort of like the way the news, it sort of seemed like it was coming out over the day, how people were hearing it. And I understand why people heard it like that, because you're hearing from Breanna Stewart, who is a star player in the league. She is an executive leader in the union, and Kelsey Plum, who's the vice president, right? But at the end of the day, and I know, everyone may not be very detailed on labor negotiations, but while they are leaders in the union, they are still only two voices. They are two players who were providing their opinions on questions that they were being asked and not necessarily speaking for all the players. And I bring that up and then I'm going to, obviously turn it over to you, Terrika, but
Sure.
I bring that up because that was sort of the takeaway. Like, outlets were running with it. We saw like graphics, I was seeing things all over social media. And then
Yeah.
Callie, a friend of our show, right, Callie Finn, she posted, saying like, hey, she's sort of like getting caught up on things, but it sounds like a strike is essentially off the table for WNBA players in these CBA negotiations. And Alicia Clark, another leader in the union, said, hey, Callie, this is not accurate. A strike is very much still on the table. And then Callie, goes back and forth with her and basically, said like, great, this is super important for fans to see. And she wasn't trying to assert it as a fact. I also just love this dialogue between Callie and Alicia because it shows like the rapport that Callie has built with the Las Vegas Aces players, right? The team that she covered, and Alicia Clark was on that team. And then, but this is what was really interesting to me from Alicia. No worries, I know how you report, so I was just wanting to add some clarity for you. Players expressing personal opinion on not loving the idea of a strike versus it being taken off the table are very different. I know some of the other interviews I've watched also said, we're prepared and have been preparing should one be called. Appreciate you always. So Terrika, my question to you is, are the players on the same page? Because I feel like this is now another week where it's like, it's mixed messaging that I feel that I'm hearing, right? Because I hear other factions being very critical of the league and the offers. And then I hear others describing it as like a win. Natasha Cloud was critical of the league, many players, because the league came back with a proposal, but then proposed this date where, things have to be done for the season to start on time. And a lot of players felt like the league took 6 weeks to get back to them, and then now you want to sort of impose a deadline, and they did not appreciate that. And Natasha Cloud talked about that, and there were other players who posted about it as well on social. So what do you think, Terrika?
I have been saying for months now that the mixed messaging is driving me bonkers, because what is really going on? Bonkers.
I like that word.
Like, previously we've heard Stewie say we're not close. A strike is something that can still happen. And even in the sound that we just listened to, she said, I think both sides still need to get their ish together. Paraphrasing, but I think both proposals still need work. Then you hear Kelsey. A strike would be the worst thing for both sides. We've made progress. Like, are y'all reading the same CBA? Are y'all seeing the same proposal? Because I'm confused how two tones can be so drastically different. And again, to your point, these are not coming from random players. And that's why this context matters so much, because these are executive committee voices. And I feel like Stewie's tone is more urgency, leverage, distance from the agreement. And I feel like Kelsey Plum's tone is more like progress. Let's de-escalate. And I don't think either of those are helpful to what the WNBA or WNBPA needs at this moment, especially when there are so many things outside of the actual proposal that is beneficial for their cause. The fact that the revenue sharing has kicked in is important for what they're trying to do. The fact that just yesterday Unrivaled has released that they made $1 million off the door is beneficial to them, because it is going to be very difficult for you to convince folks that Unrivaled can make $1 million off one game at the door, and a league that has seen that particular building sell out multiple times, including the postseason, with tickets at a much higher rate, with season ticket holders that pay a much higher price. Y'all ain't make no money. See what I'm saying? So it's difficult for us to really find what the real goal is here for certain people if the messaging from the union is not on the same page. We've not heard anything from Union President Nneka Ogwumike that would suggest that this is a win and that the proposal that has been sent is a win for the WNBA, for the players. What I thought was interesting is you brought up Natasha Cloud. And, I heard from a league source who wants to remain anonymous because, unfortunately, she doesn't. This particular person doesn't really have the authority to speak publicly, but is very close to the situation. And one of the things that I found to be very interesting is the way that the max salary has increased. And so not to get too much deep in the weeds, but when you see about the max salary increasing for your top players, and you see about how the rookie scale can be boosted, one thing Natasha Cloud pointed out that you mentioned is that it feels like the players in the middle are the ones that really have to worry about, how are we going to benefit from whatever these proposals are? And I look at a player like Alicia Clark, who I believe would be considered one of those players in the middle. And so for her to respond to Callie that way, to say, these are people's personal opinions, makes tons of sense. Because depending on where you fall, whether you're the person that's going to benefit from getting that supermax salary, that 1% at the top, or you're one of these new people that are going to be coming in that is going to be for sure protected because you're on a rookie deal, you may have a very different opinion than someone who's in the middle that's saying, well, hey, how am I going to benefit here? How is this financially going to be feasible for me? What are my options going to look like? And I think that is what needs to continually be secured. We've heard how many times the players say we're looking to build a proposal that will not only protect the players today, but will continue to protect the players in the future. And I don't think it's possible to come to that conclusion that you can do that if you haven't found a solution for how that middle gap of players will be compensated within the proposals that are being tossed out on either side.
Yeah, and this is spot on, because Natasha Cloud, she spent a lot of time speaking about the middle, and saying look, she's not, she needs to be really comfortable with knowing that middle tier, the middle class is protected. Lexi Brown has spoke about this on her podcast. And also because every time we get reports of what's happening, the updates, they always mention the average annual salary, what it will be, but they don't ever discuss the median or and most players, that average, it affects the middle. They're not going to be they're not going to benefit from that. And so that's what Lexi's saying, tell us what she basically wants to know what the median is.
What the median is, yeah.
Because she used a team that you cover, the Connecticut Sun, as an example, but she was basically only, I think, 2 players on that team were above the average. And so, it's a really interesting discussion, but the middle, which is the majority of the players, they definitely have a right, to be concerned. And then, the league did come back, the PA countered, the league came back with another counter. Breanna Stewart let us know that yesterday at the media availability. So the league sent back another proposal. And in that proposal, they did not move on revenue share. So it is still under 15% net. But they did make some changes that would enable players on rookie deals like Caitlin Clark, like Paige Beckers, also Aaliyah Boston, to basically advance to the max salary more quickly. And so you'll see here, it's breaking it down here, but they'll be eligible to sign a maximum contract in their 4th year. So that is a change. But as I stated, only 3 players at this time, Terrika, would benefit from that. And that's Caitlin Clark, and that's Paige Beckers and Aaliyah Boston. And so that was one of the notable changes, but that's only 3 players. And again, that's that top 1% that Natasha Cloud was talking about.
Yeah, and I also think it's fair to note, too, that some of the other things, because we talk a lot about the revenue sharing, but there are also other things that the middle class of players could be focused on besides the revenue percentage security. There's also the housing guarantees, whether that's long-term or not, the roster expansion, because if you're in the middle of the pack, you don't have a guaranteed spot on every team like everybody else might have. So that's going to be important to them. And the salary cap structure, that's going to be important to them. So it's fair to assume that depending on where you fall in the class of players, your urgency levels will be very different than someone that's sitting at the top. Even someone that gets a ton of endorsements, your money coming in may look a little different. So your sense of urgency on certain matters may not be the same as someone who maybe isn't sponsored by a shoe brand or doesn't have commercial brands that are gravitating to them and what they do. So it is a lot to consider, but I'm often wondering, is this like strategic messaging, or is there a real philosophical difference between the Players Association on how hard they should push given this March 10th deadline that the league has now placed on this deal to get done?
Well, I want to be clear that the strike authorization is still in place.
Yep.
And at least the latest reporting was that they're not going to vote on that again. So whether there are players now expressing that they don't, unless they vote again and they get the percentage needed, it really doesn't matter even if some of the top stars don't want to strike. If they don't get the numbers to get that, then it doesn't matter anyway. But right now, obviously, they're still trying to work through this latest counter proposal that they received from the league. I'd really love to hear from NECA on it. So I hope we do hear from her soon, because as you mentioned, we haven't heard from her on this latest, round, or also on just all the comments that were made yesterday. I also thought one other thing was really interesting about what Breanna said when she was asked about Adam Silver's involvement in the negotiations, because during All-Star Weekend, he said he's very involved behind the scenes, but that he's very involved. And I know that you talked about it, saying that you thought Adam Silver could probably be more involved. And then Breanna Stewart says, from our perspective, he's not involved. And so I just thought that was interesting because, again, just different messages and things that we're hearing, Terrika.
Natalie. I'm so sick of this man. I'm so sick of this man. Adam, when I say I am not the least bit shocked or surprised that Stewie has, and granted, you know what I loved even more is that she didn't try to quantify it and say, well, he's not been at any of the meetings that I've been to, or he's not been at any of the meetings that I've seen. No, she stood 10 toes down and said, he ain't been there. He ain't been there. I don't know what he's doing behind the scenes, but he ain't been at no negotiating table. That he ain't been there.
Well, in fairness, I think he did say that he's behind the scenes, but he said very involved. And I'm just confused if you're very involved, even if it's behind the scenes, how the players don't feel your presence at all. I don't know. That kind of seems inconsistent to me, but maybe they define behind the scenes, differently. I don't know.
I really think you and I are saying the same thing. I'm just a little bit more aggravated by it because I have been egging this man on to be a face and be a presence in this. The NBA is not absolved of its role in this. And you are Kathy Engelbert is the only commissioner in the major sports in the U.S. that does not answer directly to owners. She answers to Adam Silver. There's no other league that has a commissioner that governs a commissioner. You know what I mean? So it's for you to truly feel like you're playing some large role, but the person, one of the biggest names in this league who sits on the executive committee can't confirm whether or not you've been involved in the conversation because she hasn't seen you at the negotiation table. Come on. I worked behind the scene as a producer for a lot of years, but guess what? Every once in a while, I popped up on a camera. I popped up on a mic. People could say, I know Terrika's the producer because I can see her work. She shows it. I find it incredibly interesting that you're behind the scenes working and still we don't know what you're doing. So that's to me, that's problematic. And if they're gonna toss out a date of March 10th for this to be completed, you might need to be a bit more than just behind the scenes.
Right. Well, look, this is becoming a very interesting negotiation, and we will continue to follow it. Terrika, thank you so much for joining me today on the WNBA on NBC. Guys, please tune in and subscribe to our YouTube channel, the WNBA on NBC, so you do not miss out.